some of you may know this, but around the country today, there are at least 40 literary events that are happening, including at Kenyon right now, where I should be, but I'd rather be here. And it's in connection with Writers for Migrant Justice. So I want to read you a little bit about that. Immigrant Families Together was founded in June 2018 in response to the immigration policy separating families at the U.S.-Mexico border. They pay bonds for parents in detention and work to reunite them with their children. Additionally, they support over 100 reunited families as they recover from their detention trauma and adjust to life in the U.S., while their asylum cases are adjudicated. All of the IFT volunteers are working pro bono, so every dollar raised will go directly to help immigrant families that are or have been separated at the border. If you'd like to make a donation, you can go to a GoFundMe page. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but if you look up Writers for Migrant Justice, there you'll find the link, and I would encourage that we live in a time of trauma of all kinds. And it would be funny if it weren't so awful. I'm very happy to be back at Denison. It's funny, we think of Denison and Kenyon as friendly rivals, but in fact, members of your creative writing program are very close friends of mine and colleagues and people I've known and worked with and admired for many years. So coming here is a great pleasure, and there's a lot in common between Denison and Kenyon, and you can argue, well, it's better here for this and better there for that, but you got better restaurants in Granville. Children of God is, in fact, a collection, new and selected stories. And it was an interesting experience to go back over 40 plus years of stories I've published and decided which ones should go in here. It was interesting in all kinds of ways. You know, a lot of the stories I hadn't read in nearly 40 years, and I was a little worried. But in fact, for me anyway, they hold up. I had pleasure rediscovering my own early stories. I'm not in a position to say whether I've gotten better or worse as a writer, but there are through channels over those 40 years. But also the world has changed in a lot of ways. So a couple of stories I chose not to put in here were I fundamentally believe a writer can write about anything. And the only criterion ultimately is, does it work? If it works, that's the end of the conversation. Unfortunately, we don't live in a time like that anymore. So I had a story told from a woman's point of view that I felt would arouse some ire because of appropriation. And I just didn't want to risk alienating readers from other parts of the book. And likewise, there was one with an Indian, Asian Indian narrator. And I decided not to include them because it wasn't worth it. But it's just a mark of how the world has changed. The other thing about a collection like a new and selected, so roughly it's 40 plus years since I began writing short stories. I'm about to step down as editor of the Kenyon Review. I'm so ready. So in a way, this is a milestone. But milestones are weird things. It's not just telling you how far you have to go, maybe. It also tells you where you're at and where you've been. So a milestone is a way of orienting yourself. And that's sort of how I look at this collection. So what I'm going to do today is, Mike anticipated me. He mentioned two of the stories. I'm going to read a little bit from two stories, both of which he mentioned, beginning with Divergence. And read a little bit from that and a little bit from Children of God, which are very different, as you'll see, in all kinds of ways. And then I'm happy to take some questions. The other thing I wanted to mention about this whole process of looking back and collecting them and all of that, I've written novels, I've written nonfiction, scholarship, all kinds of things, but I think in my gut, in my core, I am a short story writer. And you sort of find your way to that. And a lot of people think of short stories as merely shorter versions of novels, excerpts, just, not different in kind. And after all these years, I'm now ready to say, belatedly, stupidly, well, yeah, they're different. I think short stories have a kind of compression that longer form fiction doesn't necessarily have. As Edgar Allan Poe said, every comma, every word matters. And there is a kind of compression to it that concentrates it, so that even small gestures have larger significance. And that's why I believe short stories are difficult to read. They're exhausting to read. You have to put a lot of yourself into them, which is why, the New Yorker publishes one story an issue. They used to publish 2 or 3 and occasionally even 4. But, short story collections, sadly for me, don't sell very well. And this is surprising when you think, oh, everyone's so busy, they don't want to take on long things, they want to just be able to blow through. But you can't blow through a good short story. You have to really give yourself. And then when you finish, you don't just immediately go on to the next one. But anyway, that's what I am. So, Divergence. In Divergence, Jeremy Mathis is this young professor at a college that's a lot like this or a lot like Kenyon. We call it here Ransom College. And he's just received tenure in the classics department. And he is a big cyclist. He and his wife like to cycle. And his wife, as a gift after his tenure, has bought him a very fancy new bike. And they're going out for a first spin early in the story. They were flying now across the rolling open country of central Ohio, the river meandering near and away again from the old rail path. "Hey, Fancy Pants, quit showing off," Owen grunted loudly. Jeremy swiveled and tossed him a wave. The machine he was riding yielded such a pure joy that, without quite realizing it, he'd been out front and pressing his friends beyond their usual pace. He eased, coasting, so that Gretchen could swing into the lead. As he drifted back to her side, Shivani, his wife. Shivani was breathing hard, but wouldn't grant him the satisfaction of admitting it. She was also smiling broadly. "So?" she said. "Yeah," he said, "nice." He was feeling strong and swift. He'd remember that afterward. The rhythm of the ride the entire day was perfect. There was satisfaction even in the way his sweat was wicking efficiently into the breeze, except for this one annoying patch high on his brow, just under the lip of his helmet. He flicked at it with a finger, and in that instant spied the groundhog ambling out of tall grasses along the river. This, too, he recalled later. How it raised its snout, spotting them in turn. Maybe Jeremy was caught up in his own momentum, rhythm, surprise. He hesitated. Had he started to call out? The muscles in his throat tightened later when he recalled the instant. For its part, the animal froze as well, considered, then with astonishing quickness hurtled its bulk of rolling muscle and fat across the path. Dodging Gretchen, it rammed heavily into Shivani's spokes. His eyes were already open. This he realized. But only gradually would they tighten toward focus, and only partly. The pounding pulse in his head throbbed more painfully as his vision cleared. But someone was just then sticking a finger into his eye, pushing one lid up and the other, and he was figuring she was a doctor. Who else would poke him with such casual deliberateness? And so this was a hospital, and he was in a hospital. Okay. When he woke again, he remembered the hospital right off. His own lack of surprise, of curiosity, surprised him. The dimmed light in the room seemed to thrum at the same rate as the thud of pain in his head. A woman was hovering between him and the light, looking for something in his face, studying him. Was this the doctor again? He started to ask, and then, the effort too exhausting, fell back and far away. The woman glanced to the side, and then someone else, Shivani, was hovering too, closer. He felt her kiss on his lips. "Hey," she said softly, and held a straw to his mouth. Water was good. He sucked after more. "What the fuck?" he tried to whisper, water dribbling down his chin. Next time, or maybe the time after, that's when he began to realize something was wrong, or at least different, though he couldn't put his finger on it, couldn't put a name to it. Shivani had been speaking for a while. He realized this too, but his attention was drifting. He tried hard to appear attentive. "Do you remember?" she asked. She was asking him. "Not sure," he mumbled. He was proud of that answer. It didn't give him away. "You saw it just before, right? The groundhog?" The groundhog he did remember. "Sure," he said. "I didn't. That's the thing. I felt Gretchen swerve and the thump as it hit my front wheel, and then I was pitching over. Darling, brave Jeremy, you tried to catch me. So we were both going down. Owen and Lee ran right into us and down into the mangle. What a mess." She sighed, and he could tell she was struggling not to cry. He didn't know what to say. He remembered the groundhog. "Your helmet split on the pavement just like it's supposed to, but you were not cold anyway. The rest of us were nothing but scrapes and were nothing but cuts and scrapes." Shivani was struggling with her own helplessness. He closed his eyes. Her voice, its elite Delhiwala cadence, more British than the Queen, was scraping, grating, annoying. It had never bothered him before. He knew that. But all this emotion, the concern and guilt, was radiating from her too, demanding a response in kind. Was he supposed to provide sympathy? A quick surge of anger shivered him. His head was throbbing harder. The flame of his little rage expired almost instantly, leaving him frail, a spent wick on the hospital bed. He could not move. Jeremy groaned. Shivani stroked her cool hand across his forehead. She had been at his bedside when he woke. He remembered this too, and he'd recognized her right off. Her eyes tired, the stylish flare of her short hair unusually mussed in the non-time of the hospital. He'd known who she was. He'd been glad to see her, truly, to sip the cool water through a straw, grateful not to be alone in this strange place. But now, as he considered, and he was panting lightly through his mouth, he realized that even in that first moment awake, he'd also felt what? Different. Distanced, dislocated, watching this lovely woman from very far away. His wife, hugging a silk shawl against the arid chill. Someone he knew so very well. And yet it seemed as though a tether between them had snapped, like a tendon torn at bone hinge. A question occurred to him, and he opened his eyes once more. "How long?" he whispered. She hesitated, searching his face. "You've been here 2 weeks. That stopped him. It took a while to make sense. 2 weeks? I was out for 2 weeks? Shivani nodded, and now she was looking sad and worried and guilty again, and relieved all at once, tears in her eyes. He turned his head away. He figured the groundhog must have got away free and clear. Thank you. And now we're going to go briefly to India, where, as Mike said, my wife is a historian of India, and she's been there many times and loves it. She's fluent in 4 or 5 languages. And I've been there often, and we lived there for a year. We both had Fulbrights. And so a lot of my stories have some kind of Indian element to them. And in this story, Children of God, as Mike mentioned, The main character is a young American boy who has come to India, to Delhi, with his American parents, and they live in Greater Kailash, GK1 as it's known in Delhi. And he's waiting to get into school, and in the meantime he's at home being taken care of by a nurse or ayah, and there are also some maids working in the house. GK1 is a strange place. It's got a beautiful maidan or garden in the middle of the development, and some fancy equipment, slides and wheels and things for the children to play on. But there are actually two sets of children. There's the wealthy or middle class children who live in GK1, and they use the equipment while they're home, and then when they go to school, a whole second population of children who whose parents are the servants who work in the houses, emerge from the alleys and backgrounds and use some of the equipment. And obviously these are very different populations. There's a lot of tension between them. And Daniel gets caught up in that. And in the part of the story that I'm reading, he does what no one in his position or in the proper families would ever normally do. He slips out the back door into the alleys, the alleyways behind the nice houses of GK1. Daniel slips away into the back hall once more. Reena, having switched on the small TV to a Hindi movie, will assume he has gone to the toilet or into his bedroom. Radha is scrubbing the stone floor of the bath, and Daniel quietly sneaks past. The heavy door is bolted again, but not locked. Carefully, stealthily, he swings the bolt up and pushes it forward. The door creaks open. He draws it shut behind him, and suddenly he is surrounded by high walls and barbed wire and packed dirt ruts, a separate world hidden away behind Greater Kailash. 2 paces away, the Indian boy is watching him. He hasn't moved. He isn't smiling. Daniel, fighting not to shiver in the cold, hunkers down next to the boy and doesn't smile either. A fire of twigs and dung flickers a few yards away. An old man is warming himself, lean shanks thrust nearly into the kindling. Daniel nods at it. Gunga hesitates, but the other rises and heads to the small blaze. The smoke is heavy, the air hard to breathe, but a dull warmth does hover close. Daniel squats. The old man, chewing toothlessly at something invisible, eyes him, but doesn't move or speak. Soon, Soon Daniel has soaked enough warmth or grown used to the chill, and he rises. Without a sound, Gunga sets off, and Daniel follows him deeper into the maze. They turn a corner, too, coming upon other fires scattered here and there. Each bend of walls and dust is all but identical. Disoriented, Daniel coughs, looks back, sees nothing familiar or singular. A heavy cloud of coarse smoke leans on everything. He has no idea where the Indian boy is leading him, what there is to show, but he eagerly follows as if to discover some potent secret he will never find on his own. Gunga has no particular destination in mind. All he yearned for this morning was a glimpse of the white-haired Ferengi boy. He never expected him to enter his world, couldn't even dare hope it. Together, they wander past a cluster of shacks backed against a concrete wall that bends in an arc for 100 paces. On the other side is a sewer trench. In this cold weather, the stench is muted, cloaked by the ever-present smoke. Each hut is patched together out of mud and cardboard and scraps of corrugated tin, including the one where Gunga and his mother live. He wonders whether the Ferengi boy will sense anything, will want to see. But Daniel is watching everything carefully without seeing, without sensing, and Gunga suddenly does not want to draw him into the darkness of their hut, to show him they have nothing to offer, not even chai, with his mother off working at this hour. He's imagined sharing his secret treasure of pins and pens, half-smoked cigarettes, and the tiny glass bottles he's collected, one way or another, and hides in a box tucked behind a mat at the wall. But now he realizes this too is impossible. A peacock hen screeches invisibly, startling Daniel. He trots around the corner and discovers several birds scratching in the dust, pecking at a small roost of garbage dropped next to an anonymous door. A male spreads its wings and lifts heavily to a rooftop overhead. Delighted, Daniel waves to his friend. Ganga follows, but doesn't understand what the Ferengi is upset about. Ahead on the path, he spies two of his friends, hunched intently. He almost pats the stranger's arm, but hasn't the courage, doesn't know what the response will be. Will he be beaten for risking a touch? Phlegm gathers in his throat at the thought, and he spits heavily at a wall. But Daniel has spotted the other boys too. He tugs at Ganga's thin shawl. Ganga grins to be answered so quickly, a thrill shooting through him, but the other boy doesn't notice. And they hurry to find out what in the dust is worthy of such attention. Ganga's friends are squatting on their heels, one wearing a blue sweater vest with a wide gash at the shoulder. The other's brown shawl, identical to Ganga's, is wound tightly about his shoulders and knees. Only his dark eyes move. They are quick and alert. Beneath them, a butterfly swatch of pink skin, a birthmark or scar, stretches from cheek to cheek across his nose, as if the top layer has been seared away. Blue Sweater has a stick. He jabs it into the jowl of the pariah dog, which isn't quite dead at their feet. It twitches, muscles pricking involuntarily. Its eyes are crusted shut. Scabs cover much of its lean gray body. Daniel watches, horrified and slightly sick to his stomach, fascinated. Again, Blue Sweater stabs with indifferent cruelty. No twitch this time, no sighs, nothing. But between one torment and the next, death has worked its transformation. No pretense remains that what lies before them is anything more than loosely gathered sticks covered by a stained rug. For the first time, the boy with the butterfly mask moves, a hand appearing from beneath his shawl to grab one of the dog's hind legs. Without a word or sound, he rises and sets off down the alley, dragging the carcass behind him, with some matter-of-fact purpose that is all mystery to Daniel. Blue Sweater follows lackadaisically. Ganga watches his guest, uncertain. Daniel is uncertain too. He is sickened and excited all at once. He knows he has witnessed something as ordinary as the dust and smoke about them, and yet it is disturbing, thrilling. He would like to see more, but he doesn't know what, and he doesn't know how to ask. He turns his eye to the other boy, who wags his head from side to side reassuringly, imploringly. Still unable to fathom the stranger's reaction or desires, Ganga sets off down another alley. Without warning, they emerge abruptly behind the temple and onto the small Maidan of Greater Kailash. The Sabjiwala brushes past Daniel, pushing his wooden cart on the cracked pavement toward the next row of houses. His tomatoes, eggplants, and onions glisten purple and red and green in the morning light. Startled, Daniel feels more disoriented than in the maze of alleys. Haven't they wandered leagues and eons from this life? Can reappearing be so easy? Thank you.